Across every continent lie echoes of civilizations that flourished, faded, and became legend. In the shifting sands of ancient deserts, beneath jungle canopies that have grown wild for centuries, and hidden within remote mountain valleys, the remnants of remarkable human societies wait patiently to tell their stories. These are not merely ruins or broken stones scattered by time. They are the carefully preserved signatures of peoples who built magnificent cities, developed sophisticated technologies, and created art that still moves us today. Their achievements challenge everything we thought we knew about the past, revealing capabilities and knowledge that seem almost impossible for their time. For generations, these lost worlds existed primarily in myths and legends passed down through oral traditions and ancient texts. Tales of golden cities swallowed by desert storms, of advanced civilizations that vanished overnight, of mysterious builders who left behind monuments too grand for their supposed primitive tools. Some dismissed these stories as fantasy, while others searched desperately for proof that such wonders could have existed. The stories themselves are mesmerizing. Ancient Arabian poets spoke of Irram of the Pillars, a city so magnificent that it rivaled paradise itself, until divine wrath buried it beneath endless dunes. Greek historians wrote of lands beyond the known world where impossible monuments rose from jungle floors. Medieval travelers returned with tales of cities carved into living rock, their builders vanished like morning mist. Yet these were more than stories. Hidden within the folklore were fragments of genuine memory, cultural echoes of real places and real people. The challenge for modern archaeology has been separating the threads of truth from the tapestry of myth, finding the kernel of historical reality wrapped within layers of poetic embellishment. Today, archaeology reveals these cultures with unprecedented clarity, replacing myths with tangible reality. Using ground-penetrating radar that can see through solid earth, satellite imagery that detects buried walls from space, and careful excavation techniques that preserve the smallest artifacts, researchers are uncovering the truth behind the legends. What they find is often more remarkable than the stories themselves. The reality is that human civilization is far older, far more sophisticated, and far more interconnected than we ever imagined. From Turkey to Cambodia, from Ethiopia to Easter Island, ancient peoples were creating marvels of engineering, art, and social organization thousands of years before we thought such achievements possible. They were trading across vast oceans, calculating the movements of stars, and building structures that still challenge our modern understanding of construction. Some of these civilizations left behind writing systems we are still struggling to decode. Others created astronomical calendars of breathtaking precision. Many developed agricultural techniques that sustained millions of people in environments we consider harsh and unforgiving. Their achievements force us to reconsider everything we thought we knew about the capabilities of ancient humanity. The loss of these civilizations is often as mysterious as their achievements. Some disappeared gradually, their populations migrating to new lands or integrating with neighboring cultures. Others seem to have vanished more suddenly, leaving behind empty cities and unanswered questions. Climate change, natural disasters, warfare, and disease all played roles in these transformations, but the full stories are only now beginning to emerge from careful archaeological investigation. What makes these discoveries even more profound is how they connect to us. These were not alien civilizations from a distant planet. They were our ancestors, people with the same fundamental capacities for creativity, ingenuity, and social organization that we possess today. Their successes and failures offer lessons about human resilience, the fragility of complex societies, and the enduring power of human achievement. Tonight, we journey through time to explore these remarkable civilizations. We will walk through their streets, examine their monuments, and piece together the stories of their rise and transformation. Some were trading empires that connected distant continents through networks of commerce and cultural exchange. Others were centers of learning where mathematics, astronomy, and philosophy flourished centuries before their supposed invention. Many developed technologies that would not be rediscovered for centuries, if at all. Each civilization we explore tonight has its own character, its own mysteries, and its own lessons to teach us. Some built upward, creating soaring monuments that touched the sky. others built inward, developing complex social systems that sustained large populations for centuries. All of them demonstrate the remarkable capacity of human beings to create meaning, beauty, and lasting achievement even in the face of enormous challenges. What is true and what is not about the world's greatest lost civilizations? The answers lie waiting in the archaeological record, more fascinating than any myth, more inspiring than any legend. These are their stories, told through the patient work of scientists who sift through sand and stone to reveal the magnificent complexity of our shared human past. In the vast emptiness of the Arabian Peninsula, where sand dunes shift like slow-moving oceans and the horizon shimmers with heat mirages, lies one of archaeology's most tantalizing mysteries. Here, somewhere beneath the endless expanse of the Rub al-Khali, the empty quarter, may rest the remains of a city so magnificent that ancient poets called it the Atlantis of the Sands. The story of Irram of the Pillars begins not with archaeology, but with words that have echoed through Arabian culture for over 1,000 years. In the Quran, in the 89th chapter known as Surah al-Fajr, there appears a brief but haunting reference to Irram dat al-Imad, Irram of the Pillars. The text speaks of this place as something remarkable, something that stood apart from all other settlements of its time, a city the likes of which had not been created in any land. But the Quran tells us little more than this tantalizing reference. It was the storytellers, the poets, and the chroniclers of later centuries who filled in the details, creating a legend that would capture imaginations for generations. They described Irram as a city of impossible beauty built by a king named Shaddad who sought to create an earthly paradise that would rival the gardens of heaven itself. According to these tales, Shaddad was a descendant of Ad, one of the ancient peoples mentioned in Islamic tradition. Possessed by pride and ambition, he commanded the construction of a city unlike any the world had ever seen. The pillars that gave Irram its name were said to be made of gold and silver, studded with precious gems that caught and reflected the desert sun like captured stars. Gardens bloomed impossibly in the desert, fed by ingenious water systems that brought life to the most barren landscape on Earth. The legend tells us that Shaddad's architects and engineers worked for decades, perhaps centuries, perfecting their creation. They brought materials from the ends of the known world, rare woods from distant forests, stones quarried from far mountains, metals smelted in foreign lands. Caravans stretched across the desert like endless chains, bringing tribute and materials to feed the growing wonder of Irram. But pride, the stories warn us, comes before a fall. When Shaddad finally completed his earthly paradise and set out to inhabit it, divine judgment struck. A terrible storm arose from nowhere, a wall of sand and wind that buried the entire city in a single day. Shaddad and his people perished, and Irram vanished beneath the dunes, becoming a whispered legend told around campfires and in the courts of kings. For centuries, this remained firmly in the realm of myth. Irram was a moral tale, a warning against hubris, not a historical reality to be investigated. The empty quarter was too vast, too forbidding, too empty of landmarks for anyone to seriously consider searching for archaeological evidence. The desert had swallowed countless caravans and explorers. What hope could there be of finding a city that might never have existed at all? The story might have remained forever in the realm of legend were it not for a remarkable convergence of modern technology, scholarly persistence, and perhaps a touch of the same adventurous spirit that once drove ancient traders across these inhospitable lands. In the 1980s, a filmmaker and amateur archaeologist named Nicholas Clapp became fascinated by the legend of Ubar, the Arabic name by which Irram had come to be known. Clapp was not the first to be intrigued by the possibility that Ubar might be real. Earlier explorers, including the legendary British adventurer Bertram Thomas, had collected stories from Bedouin guides about ruins hidden somewhere in the deep desert. Thomas had even claimed to have seen ancient tracks carved by countless caravans into the rock and sand, leading towards some unknown destination in the heart of the empty quarter. But Clapp brought something new to the search: access to technology that previous generations of explorers could never have imagined. Working with scientists at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, he gained access to images from space, radar data that could penetrate sand and reveal buried structures, and satellite photographs that showed the desert from a perspective no human eye had ever seen. The images were revelatory. Faint lines appeared in the satellite photographs, traces that might have been ancient roads converging on a single point deep in the Omani desert. These weren't the clear, straight highways of Roman engineering, but something more subtle, the accumulated tracks of countless caravans following the same routes for centuries, wearing paths into the landscape that remained visible even after being abandoned for 1,000 years. The convergence point was a place called Shissa, a small oasis in the Dhofar region of Oman. Local Bedouin knew of ruins there, but they had never been systematically investigated. If Ubar had existed, if it had been the great trading center described in legend, then this convergence of ancient routes made perfect sense. A city built around a reliable water source positioned at the crossing point of major trade routes would naturally become a center of commerce and culture. In 1991, Clapp assembled an international team of archaeologists and began excavating at Shissa. What they found was both more and less than the legend had promised. There were indeed ruins, substantial ones. The remains of a fortress-like structure emerged from the sand, its walls built of carefully fitted stone blocks. Underground, they discovered an elaborate water management system, a series of channels and cisterns that had once brought life to this corner of the desert. The architecture was impressive, clearly the work of skilled engineers who understood both construction and hydraulics. This was not a simple Bedouin camp or a temporary way station. The scale and sophistication of the construction suggested a permanent settlement of some importance, a place where people had invested considerable time, effort, and resources in creating something built to last. Carbon dating and other archaeological techniques provided a timeline for the site. The fortress had been built sometime around the 1st century of the Common Era and had remained active for several centuries thereafter. This placed it squarely in the period when the incense trade was at its height, when frankincense and myrrh from the southern Arabian Peninsula were among the most valuable commodities in the ancient world. The incense trade helps explain why a substantial settlement might have flourished in such an unlikely location. Frankincense trees grow only in a few locations along the southern coast of Arabia and the Horn of Africa. The precious resin they produce was essential for religious ceremonies throughout the ancient world, from the temples of Egypt to the altars of Rome. Caravans carrying this aromatic treasure had to cross the empty quarter to reach markets in the north, and they needed secure stopping places where they could rest, resupply, and defend their valuable cargo. Shissa, positioned at the convergence of ancient trade routes and blessed with reliable water, would have been perfectly positioned to serve this function. The fortress would have provided security, the water systems would have sustained both people and animals, and the location would have made it a natural gathering point for traders from across the region. But was this truly Ubar, the legendary Irram of the Pillars? The archaeological evidence was intriguing but not conclusive. The scale of the ruins, while impressive, hardly matched the magnificent city described in legend. There were no golden pillars, no evidence of the vast gardens and palaces that the stories had promised. What Clapp and his team had found was significant, but it seemed more like a well-built caravanserai, a fortified trading post, than the earthly paradise of Arabian folklore. The debate among scholars continues to this day. Some argue that Shissa represents at least part of the historical reality behind the Ubar legend. A successful trading center built around sophisticated water management in the heart of the desert could easily have inspired stories that grew with each telling. The fortress might have been just one component of a larger settlement that has yet to be fully explored, or there might be other sites in the region that contribute to the archaeological picture. Others remain more skeptical. The gap between the relatively modest ruins at Shissa and the magnificent Irram described in legend is substantial. They point out that similar trading posts existed throughout the ancient Middle East, and that finding one in the Arabian Peninsula, while archaeologically significant, does not necessarily validate the more extraordinary claims of the traditional stories. The question of the great sandstorm that supposedly buried Ubar in a single day remains particularly problematic from an archaeological perspective. The ruins at Shissa show no evidence of sudden catastrophic burial. Instead, they suggest gradual abandonment, the slow decline that might be expected when trade routes shifted or water sources failed. The dramatic destruction described in legend finds no support in the physical evidence uncovered so far. Yet the search for Ubar has revealed something perhaps more valuable than confirmation of any specific legend. It has demonstrated the sophisticated nature of ancient Arabian civilization, the engineering skills required to sustain permanent settlements in one of the world's most challenging environments, and the complex trade networks that connected the Arabian Peninsula to the wider ancient world. The water management systems at Shizar represent a remarkable achievement of ancient engineering. The builders understood hydrology, geology, and construction techniques that allowed them to capture and conserve precious water resources in a land where rain falls rarely and irregularly. They created underground channels that collected groundwater and directed it to storage areas where it could sustain a permanent population even during extended dry periods. The location itself reveals the geographical knowledge and strategic thinking of ancient traders and city planners. Shizar was not placed randomly in the desert. Its position at the convergence of natural travel routes demonstrates a sophisticated understanding of desert navigation, seasonal weather patterns, and the logistics of long-distance trade. The people who built this settlement understood their environment intimately and used that knowledge to create something lasting and valuable. Perhaps most importantly, the search for Ubar has reminded us that the boundary between legend and history is often more fluid than we might expect. The stories of Irram of the Pillars clearly contained elements of fantasy and moral instruction, but they also preserved genuine cultural memories of real places and real achievements. The challenge for archaeology is not to dismiss the legends, but to carefully separate the historical kernels from the mythological embellishments. The empty quarter still holds its secrets. Vast areas remain unexplored, and new technologies continue to reveal previously hidden features of the landscape. It is entirely possible that future excavations will uncover sites that more closely match the magnificent Irram of legend. It is equally possible that the historical reality was always more modest than the stories suggested, and that the true achievement of these ancient people lay not in creating an earthly paradise, but in the more practical miracle of building sustainable communities in one of the planet's most unforgiving environments. For now, Ubar remains poised between myth and reality, a reminder that the ancient world was both more complex and more interconnected than we often imagine. Whether or not Shizar was truly the legendary Irram of the Pillars, its ruins stand as testimony to human ingenuity, perseverance, and the enduring power of stories to preserve the memory of remarkable achievements across the centuries. In the American Southwest, where red rock canyons carve deep scars into ancient landscapes and mesas rise like monuments to geological time, there exists a mystery that has captivated archaeologists and visitors for over a century. High on seemingly inaccessible cliff faces tucked into natural alcoves carved by wind and water over millions of years, stand some of the most remarkable architectural achievements of ancient North America. These are the cliff dwellings of the ancestral puebloans, a people once known by the Navajo word Anasazi, meaning ancient enemies or ancient ones. Today we use the more respectful term ancestral puebloans, acknowledging their direct connection to the modern Pueblo peoples of the Southwest. But regardless of what we call them, their achievements speak for themselves in stone and mortar, in precisely fitted walls and ingeniously planned communities that seem to grow organically from the living rock itself. The story of the ancestral Puebloans unfolds across nearly 4 centuries, from roughly 850 to 1250 of the Common Era. This was a period of remarkable cultural flowering, when small bands of hunter-gatherers gradually transformed themselves into sophisticated urban planners, master builders, and astronomical observers whose knowledge rivaled that of any civilization of their time. The transformation did not happen overnight. Archaeological evidence reveals a gradual evolution from simple pit houses dug into the earth to increasingly complex above-ground structures. The earliest ancestral Puebloan settlements were modest affairs, circular dwellings partially underground that provided shelter from the harsh extremes of desert climate. But as generations passed, these people developed increasingly sophisticated building techniques, social organizations, and ways of understanding their environment. By the year 1000, they were constructing multi-story buildings that would not look out of place in a modern city. These were not random collections of rooms, but carefully planned communities with designated areas for different activities. Storage rooms for precious corn, beans, and squash were placed in the most secure locations. Living quarters were positioned to take advantage of natural heating and cooling. Ceremonial spaces called kivas were integrated into the overall design, circular underground chambers that served as gathering places for religious and social activities. But it was in the 13th century that the ancestral puebloans achieved their most stunning architectural triumphs. Perhaps driven by increasing population pressure, climate challenges, or the need for better defense, they began building their settlements in locations that seem almost impossible by modern standards. High on sheer cliff faces, in natural alcoves barely large enough to hold a few rooms, they constructed entire communities that could house hundreds of people. Mesa Verde, in what is now Colorado, preserves some of the most spectacular examples of these cliff dwellings. Cliff Palace, the largest of these structures, contains over 150 rooms and 23 kivas, all built into a natural alcove that protects it from rain and snow while providing commanding views of the surrounding landscape. The precision of the construction is breathtaking. Sandstone blocks cut to exact specifications, mortar made from local clays that has held these walls together for 8 centuries, wooden beams transported from forests miles away and fitted into place with mathematical precision. The logistics of building these cliff dwellings staggers the modern imagination. Every stone had to be quarried from nearby outcrops, shaped with tools made from harder stone, and then somehow transported to building sites that required climbing steep cliff faces with no modern safety equipment. Water for mixing mortar had to be carried up from springs or streams far below. Massive wooden beams, some weighing hundreds of pounds, had to be dragged from distant forests and then somehow hoisted into position on narrow ledges hundreds of feet above the canyon floor. The builders accomplished all of this without metal tools, without wheels, without domestic animals larger than dogs or turkeys. Their only power source was human muscle, guided by extraordinary knowledge of engineering, materials science, and construction techniques passed down through generations of master builders. The fact that these structures have survived 8 centuries of weather, earthquakes, and other natural forces testifies to the skill and knowledge of their creators. But the ancestral puebloans were more than just gifted architects. They were also astronomers whose understanding of celestial cycles rivaled that of any ancient civilization. At sites throughout the Southwest, archaeologists have documented sophisticated astronomical observation devices built into the architecture itself, sun daggers that mark the solstices and equinoxes, windows and doorways aligned to frame important star rises, and buildings positioned to track the movements of the moon through its complex 18-and-a-half-year cycle. Perhaps the most famous of these astronomical sites is the Sun Dagger at Fajada Butte in Chaco Canyon, New Mexico. Here, ancient astronomers arranged 3 stone slabs in such a way that at precisely noon on the summer solstice, a dagger of light pierces between the stones and bisects a spiral carved into the rock wall behind them. At the winter solstice, 2 daggers of light frame the same spiral. The precision required to create this effect demonstrates not only sophisticated astronomical knowledge, but also the mathematical skills needed to predict exactly where shadows would fall at specific times of year. Chaco Canyon itself represents perhaps the pinnacle of ancestral Puebloan achievement. Between 900 and 1200 of the Common Era, this remote canyon in northwestern New Mexico became the center of a cultural phenomenon that archaeologists are still struggling to fully understand. The great houses of Chaco were unlike anything built elsewhere in North America at the time. Pueblo Bonito, the largest of these structures, contains over 600 rooms and rises 4 stories high in places. Its walls are built with a sophistication that rivals medieval European architecture, using different construction techniques for different purposes and incorporating features like corbelled arches that demonstrate advanced engineering knowledge. But Chaco was more than just an impressive building site. It was the hub of a vast network that connected communities across the Southwest through a system of roads that still puzzle archaeologists today. These roads are not the meandering paths you might expect from an ancient culture, but straight lines that run for dozens of miles across desert landscapes, over mesas and through canyons, connecting Chaco to outlying communities with a precision that suggests sophisticated surveying techniques. The roads themselves are an engineering marvel. Where they encounter obstacles like cliffs or steep slopes, they include carefully constructed stairs carved directly into the rock. Where they cross soft ground, they are reinforced with stone curbing to prevent erosion. Some roads are over 30 feet wide, far broader than would be necessary for foot traffic alone, suggesting they may have served ceremonial or symbolic purposes that we do not yet fully understand. The network of roads connecting Chaco to outlying communities spans hundreds of miles, reaching as far as Mesa Verde to the north and beyond the modern borders of Arizona to the south and west. This was not a random collection of paths, but a planned system that connected the Chacoan world into a single cultural and economic unit. Along these roads flowed not just people and goods, but ideas, technologies, and spiritual practices that created a remarkable cultural synthesis across a vast and challenging landscape. The goods that flowed along these roads tell us much about the sophistication of ancestral puebloan society. Turquoise from mines in New Mexico was worked into jewelry and ceremonial objects that have been found as far away as Mesoamerica. Shells from the Pacific coast were traded inland and transformed into beads and ornaments. Macaw feathers from tropical regions hundreds of miles to the south were incorporated into ceremonial regalia. This was not a simple subsistence society, but a complex network of communities engaged in long-distance trade and cultural exchange. Perhaps most remarkably, the ancestral puebloans achieved all of this in one of North America's most challenging environments. The Colorado Plateau is a land of extremes, where summer temperatures can exceed 100 degrees Fahrenheit and winter storms can dump feet of snow. Rainfall is sparse and unpredictable, coming mainly in brief, violent thunderstorms that can cause flash floods in narrow canyons. The growing season is short and the soils are often thin and poor. Yet in this harsh environment, the ancestral puebloans developed sophisticated agricultural techniques that supported surprisingly large populations. They built elaborate systems of check dams and terraces to capture and conserve precious rainfall. They developed drought-resistant varieties of corn, beans, and squash that could survive in conditions that would challenge modern farmers. They learned to read the subtle signs of weather and climate, timing their planting and harvesting to take advantage of favorable conditions while minimizing risks from drought or frost. Their success in this challenging environment was not just a matter of technology, but also of social organization. The communities they built required cooperation on a scale that suggests sophisticated systems of leadership, planning, and resource management. The great houses of Chaco could not have been built by individual families working alone. They required coordinated effort by hundreds of people over many years, suggesting social institutions capable of organizing and directing large-scale communal projects. The ceremonial aspects of ancestral Puebloan culture provide clues about how they achieved this level of social cooperation. The kivas found at every major site were more than just meeting rooms. They were sacred spaces where community members gathered for religious ceremonies, social events, and decision-making processes that helped maintain social cohesion across large and dispersed populations. The circular shape of kivas, often built into the ground with elaborate ventilation systems and carefully plastered walls, reflects sophisticated understanding of both architecture and acoustics. But perhaps the greatest mystery surrounding the ancestral Puebloans is not what they achieved, but why they abandoned their most impressive settlements. Around 1250 of the Common Era, after centuries of cultural flowering and population growth, the great centers like Mesa Verde and Chaco Canyon were gradually abandoned. The cliff dwellings that had housed thriving communities for generations were left empty, their rooms sealed with stone and mortar as if their inhabitants expected to return someday. The abandonment was not sudden or catastrophic. Archaeological evidence suggests a gradual process that took place over several decades. Rooms were carefully sealed, valuable items were removed or cached for future retrieval, and there are signs that some sites were visited periodically even after permanent occupation ended. This was not a panicked flight from disaster, but what appears to have been a planned migration to new territories. The reasons for this great migration remain a subject of intense scholarly debate. Climate records from tree rings and other sources suggest that the late 13th century was a period of severe drought in the southwest, with rainfall dropping to levels that may have made agriculture impossible in many areas. The carefully constructed water management systems that had sustained ancestral puebloan communities for centuries may have been insufficient to cope with this extended period of aridity. But climate change alone may not explain the complexity of what happened. Archaeological evidence suggests that the period immediately before abandonment was also marked by increasing social stress. There are signs of conflict between communities, including the construction of defensive walls and watchtowers. Some sites show evidence of violence, though scholars debate whether this represents warfare between different groups or internal social breakdown within communities. Population pressure may also have played a role. The success of ancestral puebloan agriculture and the growth of large communities may have pushed the carrying capacity of the land beyond sustainable limits. Even without climate change, the intensive farming practices required to support dense populations in marginal environments may have led to soil exhaustion, deforestation, and other forms of environmental degradation that made continued occupation impossible. Whatever the exact combination of factors, by 1300 of the Common Era, the great centers of ancestral Puebloan civilization had been abandoned. The people did not disappear, however. Archaeological and ethnographic evidence clearly shows that they migrated to new areas, particularly the Rio Grande Valley of New Mexico and the Hopi Mesas of Arizona, where their descendants continue to live today. The modern Pueblo peoples of the Southwest maintain strong cultural connections to their ancestral Puebloan heritage. Their languages, religious practices, architectural techniques, and agricultural methods all show clear continuities with the ancient past. The cliff dwellings and great houses may be empty now, but the cultural traditions that created them live on in vibrant modern communities that have adapted ancient wisdom to contemporary challenges. The legacy of the ancestral Puebloans extends far beyond their direct descendants. Their achievements in architecture, astronomy, agriculture, and social organization represent one of the great success stories of human adaptation to challenging environments. They created sustainable communities that thrived for centuries in conditions that would challenge even modern technology. Their understanding of natural cycles, from seasonal weather patterns to astronomical movements, allowed them to live in harmony with forces far larger than themselves. Perhaps most importantly, they demonstrated that human societies can achieve remarkable sophistication without destroying the environments that sustain them. The ancestral Puebloans left behind no toxic waste, no depleted mines, no polluted rivers. Their greatest monuments were built from local materials using techniques that worked with natural forces rather than against them. When they finally abandoned their settlements, they left behind landscapes that quickly returned to their natural state, but also architectural achievements that continue to inspire and amaze visitors nearly 8 centuries later. Today, as we face our own challenges of climate change, resource depletion, and environmental degradation, the ancestral Puebloans offer both inspiration and practical lessons. They show us that it is possible to create sophisticated, fulfilling communities while living within environmental limits. Their achievements remind us that true sustainability requires not just technology, but wisdom, social cooperation, and deep understanding of the natural world. The cliff dwellings still stand in their canyon alcoves, their empty windows looking out over landscapes that have changed little since their builders last walked these ancient paths. They are monuments not just to human achievement, but to the possibility of creating societies that enhance rather than diminish the world that sustains them. In their silence, they speak eloquently of what we might accomplish if we combined ancient wisdom with modern knowledge, creating communities worthy of the magnificent landscapes that surround them. In the fertile river valleys of what is now Pakistan and northwestern India, beneath the accumulated dust of more than 4,000 years, lie the remains of one of humanity's earliest and most sophisticated urban civilizations. Here, along the banks of the mighty Indus River and its tributaries, flourished a society that achieved levels of urban planning, engineering, and social organization that would not be matched anywhere in the world for over 1,000 years. The Indus Valley Civilization, also known as the Harappan Civilization after Harappa, one of its major cities, existed from approximately 3300 to 1300 before the Common Era. At its height, It was the largest of the world's early civilizations, covering an area greater than Egypt and Mesopotamia combined. Yet for all its achievements, it remains one of history's greatest enigmas, a civilization that built magnificently but left behind no deciphered records of its thoughts, beliefs, or political systems. The discovery of this lost civilization is itself a story of archaeological detective work spanning more than a century. In the 1870s, British engineers building railways across colonial India began finding unusual bricks in the Indus Valley region. These were not ordinary bricks, but precisely made rectangular blocks of fired clay, uniform in size and proportion, in a way that suggested mass production by skilled craftsmen. Local workers had been using these ancient bricks for ballast in railway construction, unknowingly recycling the building materials of a civilization that had vanished before the pyramids of Egypt were built. It was not until the 1920s that archaeologists began to understand what these bricks represented. Sir John Marshall, the Director General of the Archaeological Survey of India, organized the first systematic excavations at Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, two sites separated by over 400 miles but clearly built by the same culture. What they uncovered revolutionized our understanding of early human civilization. The cities revealed by these excavations were unlike anything known from the ancient world. Where other early civilizations built upward, creating imposing ziggurats and pyramids that proclaimed the power of kings and gods, the Harappan cities built outward and inward, creating vast urban landscapes focused on the practical needs of their inhabitants. These were cities designed not to intimidate or inspire awe, but to provide comfortable, healthy, and efficient living spaces for large populations. Mohenjo-daro, whose name means Mound of the Dead, offers perhaps the best window into Harappan urban planning. The city was laid out on a precise grid system, with main streets running north to south and east to west, intersecting at right angles to create rectangular city blocks. This was not the organic growth typical of most ancient cities, where streets meandered along natural contours or followed the whims of individual builders. Instead, it represents careful planning on a massive scale, suggesting central authority capable of organizing and implementing complex urban designs. The sophistication of Harappan engineering becomes apparent when you examine their infrastructure systems. Every major street was equipped with covered drains built from carefully fitted bricks and designed to carry away both rainwater and household waste. These drainage systems were not simple ditches, but engineered networks with inspection chambers, settling tanks, and outlets that carried wastewater safely away from residential areas. Many streets had wells at regular intervals, providing clean water for the inhabitants of nearby houses. Individual houses in Harappan cities were marvels of practical design. Most were built around central courtyards that provided light, air, and private outdoor space while maintaining privacy from the street. Rooms were arranged logically, with separate areas for different functions. Storage areas, often located on upper floors, kept grain and other valuables safe from floods and pests. Many houses had private wells and elaborate bathroom facilities, including what appear to be the world's first flush toilets connected to the city's sophisticated sewage system. The Great Bath at Mohenjo-daro represents perhaps the pinnacle of Harappan hydraulic engineering. This massive structure, measuring 39 feet in length and 23 feet in width, was built from precisely fitted bricks sealed with bitumen to make it watertight. Steps led down into the pool from both ends, and a sophisticated drainage system allowed the water to be changed regularly. The purpose of this monumental bath remains mysterious, but its construction required engineering skills and organizational capabilities that rival modern achievements. The standardization visible throughout Harappan civilization suggests a level of social organization and quality control that seems almost modern. Bricks were manufactured to precise specifications, with a ratio of 4:2:1 for length, width, and thickness that was maintained across the entire civilization for over 1,000 years. Weights and measures were standardized, with stone cubes following precise mathematical progressions that allowed for accurate measurement of goods in trade. Even pottery followed standardized forms, suggesting either central control of production or widespread adoption of common standards. This standardization extended to the civilization's remarkable urban infrastructure. The covered drains found in Harappan cities were built to standard dimensions and followed consistent engineering principles. Wells were constructed using standardized techniques and materials. Street layouts, while adapted to local topography, followed similar grid patterns throughout the civilization. This suggests not just shared knowledge, but active communication and coordination between cities separated by hundreds of miles. The breadth of Harappan civilization is staggering. Archaeological surveys have identified over 1,500 settlements spread across an area of roughly 500,000 square miles. These ranged from small farming villages to major urban centers, all connected by trade networks that moved goods, ideas, and technologies across vast distances. Harappan artifacts have been found as far west as Mesopotamia and as far east as the foothills of the Himalayas, testament to the civilization's far-reaching commercial connections. The variety of goods produced by Harappan craftsmen reveals a society of remarkable sophistication and artistic achievement. They were master potters, creating vessels of extraordinary beauty and technical perfection. Their metalworkers produced bronze tools and weapons that were among the finest of their time. They carved seals from steatite, with intricate designs featuring animals, geometric patterns, and mysterious script symbols. They worked with precious stones, creating jewelry and decorative objects that demonstrate both technical skill and artistic vision. Perhaps most intriguingly, Harappan craftsmen were pioneers in the production of standardized goods on a massive scale. At sites like Harappa, archaeologists have found what appear to be industrial workshops where identical objects were produced in large quantities. Pottery kilns, metalworking facilities, and bead-making workshops suggest specialized production centers that supplied goods not just to local populations, but to trade networks spanning the entire civilization. The trade networks that connected Harappan cities reveal a civilization engaged with the wider world in ways that challenge our assumptions about ancient societies. Harappan goods have been found in Mesopotamian cities, and Mesopotamian cylinder seals have been discovered at Harappan sites. This was not casual contact, but sustained commercial relationships that moved luxury goods, raw materials, and probably ideas across thousands of miles of difficult terrain. The goods flowing through these trade networks tell us much about Harappan society and values. They exported cotton textiles, one of humanity's earliest examples of woven cotton cloth. They traded in precious stones like lapis lazuli from Afghanistan and carnelian from Gujarat. They worked metals including copper, bronze, gold, and silver. They produced intricate shellwork and elaborate jewelry. These were not the products of a simple agricultural society, but of a complex urban civilization with specialized craftsmen, sophisticated technologies, and extensive commercial networks. Yet for all their achievements in urban planning, engineering, and commerce, the Harappans remain frustratingly mysterious in ways that their contemporaries in Egypt and Mesopotamia do not. The reason lies in their writing system, a script that has resisted all attempts at decipherment despite nearly a century of scholarly effort. Harappan symbols appear on thousands of seals, pottery vessels, and other artifacts, but they remain as enigmatic today as when they were first discovered. The Harappan script consists of several hundred distinct symbols, ranging from simple geometric forms to elaborate pictographs of animals, plants, and human figures. The symbols appear in short sequences, typically no more than 4 or 5 characters long, suggesting they may represent names, titles, or brief messages rather than extended texts. Unlike the long inscriptions found in Egypt and Mesopotamia, Harappan writing appears mainly on small objects, making it difficult to identify patterns or decode meanings. The absence of readable texts means that we know virtually nothing about Harappan political systems, religious beliefs, social structures, or intellectual achievements. We can see that they built magnificent cities and maintained them for centuries, but we do not know how they organized their governments or what principles guided their society. We can observe their artistic achievements and technological innovations, but we cannot read their own accounts of what they considered important or valuable. This silence has led some scholars to suggest that Harappan society was fundamentally different from other early civilizations. Where Egypt and Mesopotamia were dominated by powerful kings and elaborate religious hierarchies, the Harappan cities show little evidence of monumental architecture dedicated to rulers or gods. There are no obvious palaces, no massive temples, no royal tombs filled with precious grave goods. Instead, the archaeological record suggests a society focused on practical concerns, efficient cities, sophisticated infrastructure, and prosperous commerce. Some archaeologists interpret this as evidence of a more egalitarian society, one where wealth and power were more evenly distributed than in other early civilizations. The standardized housing, sophisticated public facilities, and apparent absence of extreme luxury might indicate a culture that valued collective welfare over individual aggrandizement. Others argue that we simply have not yet found the palaces and temples, or that Harappan rulers expressed their power through different means than their contemporaries elsewhere. The mystery deepens when we consider the apparent uniformity of Harappan culture across vast distances and long periods of time. For over 1,000 years, from roughly 2600 to 1500 before the Common Era, Harappan cities maintained remarkably consistent standards in everything from brick sizes to pottery styles. This suggests either extraordinarily effective central control or shared cultural values so strong that they persisted across generations without coercion. The decline of Harappan civilization is as mysterious as its political organization. Around 1700 before the Common Era, signs of change begin to appear in the archaeological record. New pottery styles emerge, building standards become less precise, and some cities show evidence of decline or abandonment. By 1500 before the Common Era, the great Harappan cities had been largely abandoned, and the civilization's distinctive culture had disappeared. Traditional explanations for this decline focused on catastrophic events, invasions by Indo-Aryan peoples, massive floods, or sudden climate change that made agriculture impossible. More recent research suggests a more complex and gradual process of transformation. Climate records indicate that the Indus River and its tributaries began changing course around this time, possibly due to tectonic activity in the Himalayas. Cities that had depended on river water for agriculture and trade may have found themselves stranded as the rivers moved away. Geological evidence also suggests that the region experienced a period of increasing aridity, with monsoon patterns shifting in ways that reduced rainfall across the Indus Valley. Agricultural systems that had sustained large urban populations for centuries may have become inadequate to support the civilization's complex urban centers. Trade networks that had connected Harappan cities to distant markets may have been disrupted by political changes in Mesopotamia and other regions. Rather than sudden collapse, the evidence suggests gradual adaptation and migration. Some Harappan cities show signs of continued occupation well into the second millennium before the Common Era, but with different material culture and probably different populations. People may have gradually moved eastward into the Ganges Valley, where new civilizations were emerging, or southward into peninsular India, where their technologies and knowledge could have influenced later developments. The influence of Harappan civilization on later South Asian cultures remains a subject of active research and debate. Some scholars see continuities in urban planning, water management, and craft production that suggest Harappan knowledge was preserved and transmitted to later civilizations. Others argue that the gap between the end of Harappan civilization and the emergence of later urban centers in South Asia is too great for direct cultural transmission. What seems clear is that the Harappan achievement in urban planning and engineering was not matched again in South Asia for over 1,000 years. The sophisticated drainage systems, standardized construction, and integrated city planning that characterized Harappan cities disappeared with the civilization itself. When urban centers re-emerged in the Ganges Valley during the first millennium before the Common Era, they followed different principles and achieved different kinds of complexity. Yet the Harappan legacy may be more subtle and pervasive than dramatic. Technologies like cotton cultivation, advanced metallurgy, and sophisticated craftsmanship continued to develop in South Asia after the decline of Harappan cities. The region remained connected to international trade networks, and many of the goods that had made Harappan merchants wealthy continued to flow through South Asian ports and markets. The knowledge and skills that had created Harappan civilization may have dispersed rather than disappeared, influencing developments across a wider area. Modern efforts to understand Harappan civilization continue to yield new insights and raise new questions. Advanced archaeological techniques like ground-penetrating radar and satellite imagery are revealing previously unknown sites and expanding our understanding of the civilization's extent. New excavations are uncovering evidence of craft production, trade relationships, and urban development that add complexity to our picture of Harappan society. The challenge of deciphering the Harappan script remains one of archaeology's great unsolved puzzles. Computer analysis, statistical methods, and comparison with other ancient writing systems continue to offer hope that the script may eventually be readable. If that breakthrough comes, it would revolutionize our understanding not just of Harappan civilization, but of early urban development, ancient trade networks, and the diversity of paths that human societies can take toward complexity and sophistication. Until then, the Harappan civilization speaks to us primarily through its archaeological remains, and what those remains tell us is remarkable enough. Here was a society that achieved urban sophistication without apparent need for monumental displays of power. They created cities that prioritized the health and comfort of their inhabitants over the glorification of rulers. They developed technologies and standards that persisted for over a millennium, suggesting social institutions of extraordinary stability and effectiveness. Perhaps most remarkably, they accomplished all of this in harmony with their environment rather than in spite of it. Harappan cities were built to work with natural water systems, not against them. Their agriculture appears to have been sustainable over many centuries, supporting large populations without depleting the soils or exhausting the landscape. When environmental conditions changed, they adapted and relocated rather than destroying their surroundings in futile attempts to maintain the status quo. The Harappan civilization reminds us that there are many ways to build successful societies, and that some of the most impressive achievements may be the most practical ones. In an age when we struggle with urban planning, environmental sustainability, and social equality, the Harappan example offers both inspiration and practical lessons. They show us that it is possible to create cities that serve their inhabitants rather than overwhelming them, to develop technologies that enhance rather than degrade the natural world, and to maintain social cooperation across vast distances and long periods of time. Their cities lie silent now, their streets empty of the bustling commerce that once made them among the most prosperous places on Earth. But in their careful planning, their sophisticated engineering, and their apparent commitment to collective welfare, they left behind a legacy that continues to challenge and inspire our understanding of what human civilization can achieve. In the dust of millennia, their bricks still fit together perfectly, their drains still follow logical courses, and their wells still reach down toward the water that once sustained one of humanity's greatest experiments in urban living. On a windswept hilltop in southeastern Turkey, where the rolling plains of Anatolia meet the foothills of the Taurus Mountains, stands one of archaeology's most revolutionary discoveries. Here, beneath what local shepherds had long known as Potbelly Hill, Göbekli Tepe in Turkish, lie the remains of monuments so ancient and so sophisticated that they have forced archaeologists to completely reconsider the story of human civilization. The structures at Göbekli Tepe were built approximately 996 years before the Common Era, making them older than Stonehenge by over 600 years, older than the pyramids of Egypt by nearly 7,000 years, and most remarkably of all, older than agriculture itself. These monuments were created by hunter-gatherers, people who had not yet learned to domesticate plants or animals, who lived in small mobile bands following seasonal resources across the landscape. Yet somehow, these supposedly primitive people organized themselves to create architectural marvels that rival anything built by later agricultural civilizations. The discovery of Göbekli Tepe reads like an adventure story, full of missed opportunities, chance encounters, and the kind of persistence that separates great archaeologists from merely competent ones. The site first came to official archaeological attention in the 1960s, when a survey team from the University of Chicago noted scattered carved stones on the hilltop. But they dismissed the site as nothing more than a medieval cemetery, failing to recognize the true age and significance of what lay beneath their feet. It was not until the 1980s that German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt recognized the site's true potential. Schmidt had been working in the region for years, studying the transition from hunting and gathering to agriculture that had taken place in this part of the world thousands of years ago. When he visited the hilltop in 1994, he immediately recognized that the carved stones were not medieval grave markers, but something far older and more significant. What Schmidt saw scattered on the surface were fragments of massive stone pillars, some carved with intricate reliefs of animals and mysterious symbols. The style and craftsmanship were clearly ancient, but the sophistication of the carvings suggested a level of artistic achievement that seemed impossible for hunter-gatherers. Archaeological theory at the time held that monumental architecture was a product of agricultural societies, created only after the development of farming had freed people from the constant search for food and allowed the accumulation of surplus resources needed for large construction projects. The excavations that Schmidt began in 1995 revealed layer after layer of increasingly ancient structures, each more elaborate than the last. The most recent layers, dating to around 850 years ago, contained circular enclosures built from smaller stones, impressive but not extraordinary by the standards of ancient architecture. But as the excavations went deeper, the structures became larger, more complex, and more mysterious. The oldest and most spectacular structures at Göbekli Tepe consist of massive stone circles, each centered around pairs of enormous carved pillars that rise up to 18 feet above the ancient ground level and weigh as much as 16 tons. These are not crude monoliths roughly shaped by primitive tools, but sophisticated sculptures carved with precision and artistic skill that would be impressive in any era. The pillars are T-shaped, carved from single blocks of limestone quarried from nearby outcrops, and many are decorated with elaborate reliefs of animals, abstract symbols, and enigmatic human figures. The animal carvings at Göbekli Tepe represent a bestiary of the Ice Age world, creatures that roamed the hills and valleys of Anatolia when the climate was cooler and wetter than today. Lions pad across the stone surfaces with fluid grace, their muscles and manes rendered with anatomical precision. Wild boar charge forward with tusks bared and bristles raised. Serpents coil around the pillars in sinuous curves that follow the natural contours of the stone. Vultures spread their wings in preparation for flight, their feathers individually carved with patient attention to detail. But these are not merely decorative elements added to impress viewers. The arrangement and selection of animals appears to follow symbolic patterns that we are only beginning to understand. Certain creatures appear together repeatedly, suggesting mythological or religious associations that were meaningful to the monument's builders. The positioning of animals on different pillars within the same circle creates visual narratives that may have told stories or conveyed religious teachings to those who gathered in these ancient sanctuaries. The human figures carved into the pillars are perhaps even more intriguing than the animals. These are not realistic portraits, but stylized representations that emphasize certain features while omitting others. Arms and hands are prominently displayed, often positioned as if the pillars themselves were meant to represent standing human figures. Clothing details are carefully rendered, including belts, loincloths, and what appear to be fox-skin ceremonial garments. But faces are never shown, giving these ancient figures an anonymous, timeless quality that adds to the site's mystery. The scale of construction at Göbekli Tepe is staggering when considered in the context of hunter-gatherer society. Each of the massive pillars had to be quarried from limestone bedrock using only stone tools, shaped and carved with techniques that required both skill and enormous amounts of time, then transported to the construction site and erected using methods that archaeologists are still trying to understand. The logistics of moving stones weighing multiple tons across rough terrain without wheels, draft animals, or metal tools represents an engineering challenge that would be difficult even today. But the physical challenges of construction pale beside the social implications of what happened at Göbekli Tepe. Hunter-gatherer societies are typically small, mobile groups that rarely exceed a few dozen individuals. The construction of Göbekli Tepe would have required coordination between multiple groups, probably involving hundreds of people working together over extended periods. This suggests social institutions and leadership systems far more complex than anything we typically associate with pre-agricultural societies. The question of how these hunter-gatherers organized themselves to build Göbekli Tepe has no easy answers. There is no evidence of permanent settlements at the site during its construction phase, no houses or storage facilities that would indicate a resident population. Instead, the evidence suggests that groups traveled to the hilltop for specific purposes, probably related to the ceremonies or rituals that took place within the stone circles. The site may have served as a gathering place for dispersed hunter-gatherer bands, a neutral ground where different groups could come together for trade, marriage negotiations, religious observances, or other social activities that required larger numbers of participants. The religious or ceremonial nature of Göbekli Tepe seems clear from both its architecture and its location. The stone circles are not practical structures designed for everyday activities like food storage or shelter. Instead, they appear to be ritual spaces, perhaps temples or sanctuaries where religious ceremonies took place. The hilltop location, visible from miles away across the surrounding landscape, would have made the site a prominent landmark that could serve as a gathering point for groups scattered across a wide area. The animal imagery that dominates the site's carved decorations provides clues about the beliefs and worldview of its builders. Many of the creatures depicted were dangerous predators, animals that would have posed real threats to hunter-gatherer communities. Lions, leopards, wild boar, and venomous snakes appear frequently, often in prominent positions that suggest they held special significance in the religious or mythological systems of the time. Rather than depicting the animals they hunted for food, the builders of Göbekli Tepe chose to surround themselves with images of creatures they feared. This focus on dangerous animals may reflect shamanistic beliefs common among hunter-gatherer societies, where spiritual power is often associated with the ability to control or commune with dangerous forces. The stone circles may have been places where shamans or religious specialists conducted rituals intended to protect their communities from threats both natural and supernatural. The massive scale and elaborate decoration of these monuments suggests that such rituals were considered extremely important, worth enormous investments of time and effort by communities that had few resources to spare. The construction techniques used at Göbekli Tepe reveal technological sophistication that challenges our assumptions about the capabilities of pre-agricultural peoples. The precision with which the massive pillars were carved and positioned demonstrates advanced understanding of quarrying, stoneworking, and construction engineering. The builders developed techniques for moving and erecting multi-ton stones that would not be matched in the region for thousands of years. They understood principles of structural engineering that allowed them to create stable, long-lasting monuments using only stone tools and human labor. Perhaps most remarkably, the builders of Göbekli Tepe appear to have deliberately buried their monuments when they were finished with them. Layer by layer, the stone circles were carefully covered with tons of earth and debris, creating the artificial hill that gave the site its modern name. This was not gradual abandonment or natural accumulation of soil over time, but intentional burial that must have required almost as much labor as the original construction. The reasons for this deliberate concealment remain one of the site's greatest mysteries. The burial of Göbekli Tepe may have been related to changing religious beliefs or social practices among the hunter-gatherer groups who built it. As climate conditions changed at the end of the Ice Age, and as some groups began experimenting with agriculture, the old ways of life and the religious systems that supported them may have become obsolete. Rather than simply abandoning their sacred site, the builders may have chosen to bury it as a final act of reverence, preserving it for discovery by future generations. The relationship between Göbekli Tepe and the development of agriculture in the region is one of the most intriguing aspects of the site's significance. Archaeological evidence suggests that some of the world's earliest experiments with plant domestication took place in the hills and valleys surrounding Göbekli Tepe within a few centuries of the monument's construction. Wild varieties of wheat, barley, and legumes that would later become the foundation of agricultural civilization grew naturally in this region, and it was here that humans first learned to cultivate them deliberately. Some archaeologists have suggested that the social changes required to build Göbekli Tepe may have contributed to the development of agriculture. The need to feed large numbers of people gathering at the site for construction work or religious ceremonies would have created pressure to find more reliable food sources than traditional hunting and gathering could provide. The social cooperation and organizational skills required for monumental construction may have provided models for the kinds of coordinated labor needed for agricultural work like land clearing, planting, and harvesting. Others argue that the relationship flowed in the opposite direction, that early experiments with plant cultivation provided the food surpluses and stable populations necessary to undertake monumental construction projects. According to this view, Göbekli Tepe represents an early stage in the transition from hunting and gathering to agriculture, when people had begun to settle down and accumulate resources but had not yet fully committed to agricultural lifestyles. Whatever the exact relationship, it seems clear that Göbekli Tepe was built during a period of profound social and economic transformation in human history. The end of the Ice Age brought dramatic changes to climate, environment, and the distribution of plants and animals that humans depended upon for survival. Old ways of life that had persisted for tens of thousands of years were becoming obsolete, while new possibilities for human organization and subsistence were emerging. Göbekli Tepe may represent an attempt by hunter-gatherer societies to maintain their traditional religious and social systems in the face of unprecedented change. The artwork at Göbekli Tepe provides a unique window into the mental world of our hunter-gatherer ancestors, their fears, beliefs, and understanding of the natural world around them. The sophisticated carving techniques and complex symbolic systems evident in the stone reliefs demonstrate cognitive abilities and cultural sophistication that equal anything produced by later agricultural civilizations. These were not simple people living simple lives, but members of complex societies with rich spiritual traditions and advanced technical skills. The mystery of who built Göbekli Tepe and how they organized themselves to accomplish this feat continues to drive archaeological research throughout the region. Recent excavations have revealed additional stone circles buried beneath the hill, suggesting that the site was even larger and more complex than originally believed. Ground-penetrating radar and other non-invasive techniques have identified dozens of additional structures still waiting to be excavated, promising decades of future discoveries. The broader implications of Göbekli Tepe extend far beyond archaeology into fundamental questions about human nature and social development. The site demonstrates that hunter-gatherer societies were capable of much greater social complexity and technological achievement than previously believed. It shows that the drive to create monumental architecture, to invest enormous resources in projects that serve symbolic rather than practical purposes, is not a recent development in human history, but goes back to our earliest organized societies. Perhaps most importantly, Göbekli Tepe reminds us that human civilization did not develop according to a single, inevitable trajectory from simple to complex, from primitive to sophisticated. The people who built these monuments achieved something remarkable and then chose to bury it, moving on to different ways of life that may have been more practical but were not necessarily more advanced. Their achievement stands as a testament to human creativity and ambition, but also to the diversity of paths that human societies can take in their development. Today, as excavations continue at Göbekli Tepe and related sites throughout the region, we are still in the early stages of understanding what these monuments represent and what they can teach us about our prehistoric ancestors. Each new discovery adds complexity to the picture, revealing sophisticated artistic traditions, advanced construction techniques, and complex social relationships that existed thousands of years before the rise of cities, writing, or centralized governments. The stones of Göbekli Tepe continue to guard their secrets, massive sentinels looking out over landscapes that have changed dramatically since their creation. But in their silent presence, they bear witness to the remarkable achievements of our hunter-gatherer ancestors, people who created beauty and meaning in a harsh world, who invested their hopes and fears in monuments built to last forever. In their ancient carvings, we see reflections of ourselves, reminders that the human drive to create, to believe, and to build something greater than individual survival reaches back to the very origins of our species. Along the steamy coastal lowlands of the Mexican Gulf, where tropical rivers wind through dense jungles and the air hangs heavy with moisture, and the calls of howler monkeys, there once flourished a civilization that would lay the foundations for all later Mesoamerican cultures. The Olmec, whose name means rubber people in the Aztec language, created the first complex society in the Americas, developing innovations in art, religion, politics, and technology that would influence human development in the New World for over 2,000 years. The Olmec civilization emerged around 1400 years before the Common Era and flourished until approximately 400 years before the Common Era, making it contemporary with the height of ancient Greek civilization and the founding of Rome. Yet while Mediterranean cultures were developing their own distinctive traditions of philosophy, politics, and art, the Olmec were independently creating parallel innovations on the other side of the world in environments and circumstances completely different from anything known in Europe or Asia. The heartland of Olmec civilization lay in what is now the Mexican states of Veracruz and Tabasco, a region of tropical lowlands crisscrossed by rivers and dotted with volcanic hills. This was not the kind of environment where archaeologists expected to find early civilization. The tropical climate, with its intense heat, heavy rainfall, and lush vegetation, seemed more likely to inhibit rather than encourage the development of complex societies. Early theories of civilization emphasized the importance of river valleys in arid regions, places like Mesopotamia and Egypt where irrigation agriculture could support dense populations in otherwise challenging environments. The Olmec proved that civilization could develop in very different circumstances. Rather than fighting against their tropical environment, they learned to work with it, developing agricultural techniques suited to the wet lowlands and creating a culture that celebrated rather than struggled against the natural world around them. Their art is filled with images of jaguars, serpents, and other creatures of the tropical forest, transformed into powerful symbols of religious and political authority. The discovery of Olmec civilization began in the 1860s when workers on a sugar plantation near Tres Zapotes found a massive stone head buried in the earth. The head, weighing several tons and carved from volcanic basalt, depicted a human face with distinctive features that seemed neither European nor indigenous by the standards of the time. Local people called it a kettle turned upside down, having no frame of reference for understanding what they had found. It would be decades before archaeologists began to understand the significance of this discovery. In the early 20th century, as more colossal heads were found at sites throughout the Olmec heartland, scholars realized they were looking at evidence of a previously unknown civilization. The style of the sculptures, the techniques used in their creation, and the contexts in which they were found all pointed to a sophisticated culture that predated the Maya, Aztec, and other well-known Mesoamerican civilizations by many centuries. The colossal heads that first brought the Olmec to archaeological attention remain among their most impressive and mysterious achievements. 17 of these monumental sculptures have been discovered so far, ranging in height from 5 to 11 feet and weighing between 6 and 50 tons. Each head appears to represent a specific individual, carved with distinctive facial features, headdresses, and ornamental details that suggest they were portraits of actual rulers or important leaders. The creation of these colossal heads represents an extraordinary achievement in ancient engineering and artistry. The basalt from which they were carved came from volcanic outcrops in the Tuxtla Mountains, some of which were located more than 60 miles from the sites where the finished sculptures were erected. This means that blocks of stone weighing tens of tons had to be quarried from mountainous terrain, transported across rivers and swamps, and then carved into finished sculptures using only stone tools. The transportation alone would have required enormous organizational effort and engineering skill. Recent experiments have shown that moving stones of this size across the difficult terrain of the Olmec heartland would have required hundreds of workers, sophisticated systems of ropes and levers, and probably specially constructed causeways or canals to provide smooth surfaces for transportation. The Olmec accomplished all of this without wheels, metal tools, or draft animals, relying entirely on human labor guided by advanced understanding of physics and engineering principles. The artistic achievement represented by the colossal heads is equally impressive. Each sculpture demonstrates mastery of proportion, anatomical accuracy, and expressive detail that ranks among the finest achievements of ancient art anywhere in the world. The faces are powerfully realistic yet idealized, conveying authority and dignity while maintaining individual character. The carving techniques used to create smooth surfaces, fine details, and complex three-dimensional forms show complete mastery of stoneworking technologies. But the colossal heads represent only one aspect of Olmec artistic achievement. At major Olmec centers like La Venta, San Lorenzo, and Tres Zapotes, archaeologists have uncovered a rich artistic tradition that includes monumental architecture, intricate jade carvings, sophisticated pottery, and complex relief sculptures that rank among the masterpieces of ancient American art. La Venta, the most thoroughly studied of the major Olmec centers, provides the clearest picture of Olmec urban planning and monumental architecture. The site was laid out according to a carefully planned design, with a massive earthen pyramid at its center, surrounded by plazas, platforms, and smaller structures arranged in precise geometric relationships. The main pyramid, known as the Great Pyramid, rises over 100 feet above the surrounding landscape and contains an estimated 100,000 cubic yards of earth and clay, all moved and shaped by human labor. The precision of La Venta's layout suggests sophisticated understanding of engineering, mathematics, and astronomy. The major structures are aligned along a north-south axis that deviates only slightly from true north, demonstrating accurate knowledge of cardinal directions. The spacing and proportions of different elements follow mathematical relationships that create visual harmony while serving practical functions for ceremonies and public gatherings. The construction of La Venta and other major Olmec centers required social organization on a scale that challenges traditional ideas about early American societies. Moving the millions of tons of earth needed to build the pyramids and platforms would have required thousands of workers laboring for many years. Quarrying and transporting the massive stone sculptures and architectural elements would have demanded additional specialized teams with advanced technical skills. Coordinating all of this activity suggests centralized authority capable of planning, directing, and sustaining complex projects over extended periods. The religious and ceremonial functions of Olmec centers are evident in their art and architecture, but understanding their specific beliefs and practices remains challenging due to the absence of deciphered texts. Olmec writing, the earliest known script in the Americas, consists of symbols carved on stone monuments and portable objects, but scholars have made only limited progress in understanding its meaning. Without readable texts, we must interpret Olmec religion through their visual art, architectural layouts, and the archaeological contexts in which ritual objects were found. Olmec religious imagery is dominated by a complex mythology involving transformation between human and animal forms, particularly the jaguar, which appears to have been the most important supernatural being in their pantheon. Many Olmec sculptures depict figures that combine human and jaguar characteristics, creating powerful hybrid beings that may represent shamans, rulers, or deities capable of moving between the human and supernatural worlds. The jaguar's prominence in Olmec religion reflects its ecological and symbolic importance in Mesoamerican tropical environments. As the largest predator in the region, the jaguar embodied power, stealth, and mastery over the natural world. Its ability to move silently through dense forest, hunt at night, and swim across rivers made it a perfect symbol for supernatural beings who could transcend normal limitations of space and time. Olmec rulers may have claimed descent from jaguar spirits or the ability to transform into jaguars through shamanic practices. Water imagery is equally important in Olmec art, reflecting both the environmental realities of their tropical homeland and deeper religious beliefs about the sources of life and fertility. Rivers, rain, and springs appear frequently in Olmec sculpture, often associated with serpent imagery that may represent the flowing movement of water across the landscape. Some scholars interpret these water symbols as evidence of early versions of the rain god cults that would become central to later Mesoamerican religions. The sophisticated symbolism evident in Olmec art suggests intellectual and religious traditions of considerable complexity, probably involving professional priesthoods, elaborate ceremonies, and complex mythologies that explained the origins and structure of the world. The investment of enormous resources in ceremonial centers and religious art indicates that spiritual concerns were central to Olmec society, not merely supplements to more practical activities like agriculture and trade. Olmec innovations extended far beyond art and religion into practical technologies that would influence Mesoamerican development for centuries. They were among the world's first people to process rubber from latex producing trees, creating balls used in ritual games that combined religious ceremony with athletic competition. The rubber ball game became a defining feature of Mesoamerican civilization, played in specially constructed courts at ceremonial centers throughout Mexico and Central America. The Olmec also developed sophisticated agricultural techniques suited to their tropical environment. Rather than relying on irrigation systems like those used in arid regions, they learned to work with the natural water cycles of their homeland, using raised fields and drainage canals to manage seasonal flooding while maintaining soil fertility. These techniques allowed them to support dense populations in areas that earlier archaeologists had considered unsuitable for intensive agriculture. Trade networks established by the Olmec extended across much of Mesoamerica, moving luxury goods, raw materials, and probably ideas and technologies across vast distances. Olmec-style artifacts have been found as far north as central Mexico and as far south as El Salvador, indicating commercial and cultural connections that spanned nearly the entire region. These networks moved obsidian from volcanic highlands, jade from distant mountain sources, and other precious materials that were transformed into ritual objects and symbols of elite status. The influence of Olmec civilization on later Mesoamerican cultures is difficult to overestimate. Virtually every major innovation that would characterize later civilizations like the Maya and Aztec can be traced back to Olmec origins. The concept of the divine ruler, the use of monumental architecture for religious and political purposes, the development of complex calendar systems, the creation of written scripts, and the establishment of long-distance trade networks all have their roots in Olmec achievements. The Maya, who would later create the most sophisticated writing system and astronomical knowledge in the ancient Americas, built directly on foundations laid by the Olmec. Maya concepts of kingship, religious architecture, artistic styles, and urban planning all show clear Olmec influences, transformed and elaborated but recognizably derived from earlier traditions. The great Maya cities of the Classic period, with their towering pyramids and intricately carved monuments, represent the culmination of architectural and artistic traditions that began with Olmec innovations over 1,000 years earlier. The Aztec Empire, which dominated central Mexico at the time of European contact, also drew heavily on traditions that could be traced back to Olmec origins. Aztec concepts of divine rulership, human sacrifice, and the cosmic significance of warfare all had roots in religious and political systems first developed in the Olmec heartland. Even the Aztec calendar, with its complex integration of astronomical observations and religious beliefs, represented the final flowering of intellectual traditions that began with Olmec innovations in mathematics and timekeeping. The decline of Olmec civilization around 400 years before the Common Era was gradual rather than sudden, involving transformation and dispersal rather than catastrophic collapse. Archaeological evidence suggests that the major Olmec centers were gradually abandoned as populations shifted to new areas and adapted to changing environmental and political conditions. Rather than disappearing, Olmec culture appears to have evolved and spread, influencing the development of new civilizations throughout Mesoamerica. This process of cultural transmission and transformation makes it difficult to identify a clear endpoint for Olmec civilization. In some sense, Olmec culture never really ended but continued to evolve and influence Mesoamerican development right up to the time of European contact. The colossal heads and monumental architecture of the Olmec heartland may have been abandoned, but the ideas, technologies, and traditions they represented continued to shape human development across the region for over 2,000 years. Modern archaeological research continues to reveal new aspects of Olmec achievement and influence. Recent discoveries have pushed back the dates for the earliest Olmec developments, suggesting that their innovations may have begun even earlier than previously believed. New sites are being discovered throughout the region, many showing evidence of Olmec influence in areas previously thought to be outside their sphere of cultural impact. Perhaps most importantly, ongoing research is revealing the diversity and complexity of Olmec society itself. Rather than a monolithic culture with uniform characteristics across time and space, the Olmec appear to have encompassed multiple regional traditions, different social and political systems, and considerable variation in artistic styles and religious practices. This diversity suggests a dynamic, evolving civilization that adapted continuously to changing conditions while maintaining core traditions and innovations. The legacy of the Olmec serves as a reminder that human creativity and innovation are not limited to any particular environment or set of circumstances. In the tropical lowlands of ancient Mexico, far from the river valleys where civilization was supposed to develop, the Olmec created something entirely new and remarkable. They proved that complex societies could emerge in unexpected places, that monumental architecture could be built without metal tools or wheels, and that sophisticated artistic and intellectual traditions could develop independently in the New World. Their colossal heads still gaze out over the tropical landscape they once ruled, their stone features weathered by centuries of rain and sun, but still conveying the power and dignity of the rulers they represent. In their silent presence, they remind us that human achievement takes many forms, that civilization can develop along many different paths, and that the drive to create beauty, meaning, and lasting monuments to human achievement is truly universal, transcending the boundaries of time, geography, and culture. In the rolling hills of central Italy, where olive groves cascade down gentle slopes and ancient hilltop towns still crown the landscape like jeweled crowns, there once flourished a civilization that would profoundly shape the future of Rome and the Western world. The Etruscans, known to themselves as the Ravenna, created a sophisticated culture that bridged the gap between the Bronze Age and the classical world, developing innovations in art, architecture, religion, and governance that would become the foundation stones of Roman civilization. For over 6 centuries, from approximately 900 to 300 years before the Common Era, Etruscan city-states dominated the Italian peninsula from the Po Valley in the north to Campania in the south. Their influence extended across the Mediterranean, with trading posts and colonies reaching from Spain to Asia Minor. Yet despite their profound impact on later history, the Etruscans remain one of the most enigmatic civilizations of the ancient world, their language only partially understood, their origins debated, and their ultimate fate a gradual absorption into the expanding Roman state that would eventually eclipse them. The mystery of Etruscan origins has fascinated scholars since antiquity. The ancient Greek historian Herodotus claimed they were refugees from Lydia in Asia Minor, driven from their homeland by famine and seeking new territories in the west. The Roman historian Livy, writing centuries later, argued instead that they were indigenous Italians who had developed their distinctive culture through local evolution rather than foreign migration. Modern archaeological and genetic research suggests a more complex picture, with Etruscan civilization emerging from the interaction of indigenous Italian populations with various Mediterranean influences over many generations. What seems clear is that by the 8th century before the Common Era, a distinctive Etruscan culture had emerged in the region known as Etruria, roughly corresponding to modern Tuscany, Umbria, and northern Lazio. This was a landscape ideally suited for the development of complex civilization, with fertile volcanic soils, abundant water sources, rich mineral deposits, and natural harbors that facilitated trade with the wider Mediterranean world. The Etruscans organized themselves into a confederation of independent city-states, each controlling its surrounding territory and maintaining its own government, military, and religious institutions. Major cities like Tarquinia, Cerveteri, Vulci, and Veii became centers of wealth and culture that rivaled anything in the contemporary Greek world. Unlike the Greeks, however, who often fought bitter wars between their city-states, the Etruscan cities maintained a loose confederation that allowed for cooperation in trade, warfare, and religious matters while preserving local autonomy. The wealth of Etruscan civilization was built largely on their mastery of metallurgy and their control of rich mineral resources. The hills of Etruria contained extensive deposits of iron, copper, silver, and other metals that were essential for the ancient economy. Etruscan metalworkers developed sophisticated techniques for mining, smelting, and working these materials, creating tools, weapons, and luxury goods that were prized throughout the Mediterranean world. Etruscan craftsmanship in metal is evident in thousands of surviving artifacts, from practical items like agricultural tools and cooking vessels to elaborate ceremonial objects and works of art. Their bronze work was particularly renowned, with Etruscan bronzes being exported across the ancient world and influencing artistic traditions from Spain to the Black Sea. The famous Capitoline wolf, the bronze sculpture that became a symbol of Rome, was almost certainly created by Etruscan artists, demonstrating their skill and the high regard in which their work was held even by their eventual conquerors. But Etruscan civilization was built on more than metallurgy alone. They were also skilled farmers who developed advanced agricultural techniques suited to the Italian landscape. They created sophisticated drainage systems that converted marshy lowlands into productive farmland, built terraced hillsides for growing grapes and olives, and developed crop rotation systems that maintained soil fertility over many generations. The prosperity of Etruscan cities depended ultimately on this agricultural foundation, which supported dense urban populations while providing surplus goods for trade. Etruscan urban planning and architecture represent another area of remarkable achievement. Their cities were carefully planned communities with paved streets, sophisticated water and sewage systems, and impressive public buildings. The Etruscan practice of dividing cities into regular districts according to religious principles would later be adopted by the Romans and influence urban planning throughout the empire. Their techniques for building with stone and their innovations in arch and vault construction provided the architectural foundation for later Roman engineering achievements. The religious architecture of the Etruscans was particularly influential. Their temples, built on high platforms and approached by impressive staircases, established an architectural template that would be adopted throughout the Roman world. The Etruscan practice of decorating temple roofs with elaborate terracotta sculptures created an artistic tradition that combined Greek aesthetic influences with distinctively Italian sensibilities. These rooftop sculptures, with their vivid colors and dynamic poses, must have made Etruscan cities spectacular sights for ancient visitors. Etruscan domestic architecture was equally sophisticated, with wealthy families living in houses that combined comfort with artistic beauty. Archaeological excavations have revealed homes with multiple rooms arranged around central courtyards, sophisticated heating systems, and elaborate decorations that demonstrate both technical skill and artistic sophistication. The famous painted tombs of Etruscan necropolises provide glimpses into these domestic spaces, showing banquet scenes, daily activities, and family life that reveal a culture that valued both material prosperity and artistic achievement. The Etruscan approach to death and the afterlife, as revealed through their elaborate tombs and burial practices, shows a culture with distinctive religious beliefs and social values. Unlike many ancient peoples who viewed death as the end of individual existence, the Etruscans appears to have believed in a continuation of life after death that closely resembled earthly existence. Their tombs were built as houses for the dead, complete with furniture, household goods, and wall paintings that depicted the deceased continuing to enjoy the pleasures of life. The painted tombs of cities like Tarquinia provide some of our most vivid insights into Etruscan culture and values. The walls are covered with scenes of banqueting, dancing, hunting, and athletic competitions that show a society that valued pleasure, artistic expression, and social gathering. Men and women appear together at these banquets, reclining on couches and enjoying music and entertainment in ways that shocked later Roman moralists, but suggest a more egalitarian approach to gender relations than was common in the ancient world. The position of women in Etruscan society appears to have been notably different from that in contemporary Greek and early Roman cultures. Etruscan women enjoyed greater freedom and social prominence, participating in public banquets, attending athletic events, and even taking active roles in religious ceremonies. Their names were preserved in inscriptions, and their portraits appeared on tomb paintings and sculptures, suggesting a level of individual recognition and social importance that was unusual for women in the ancient world. This relatively egalitarian approach to gender relations may have been connected to other distinctive aspects of Etruscan social organization. Unlike the rigid class hierarchies that characterized many ancient societies, Etruscan culture appears to have allowed for considerable social mobility based on achievement and wealth, rather than birth alone. successful merchants, skilled craftsmen, and military leaders could rise to positions of prominence and influence, creating a dynamic society that rewarded talent and innovation. The Etruscan economy was built on extensive trade networks that connected Italy with the wider Mediterranean world. Etruscan merchants established trading posts and colonies throughout the western Mediterranean, from southern France to North Africa. They were among the first peoples to develop regular commercial relationships with the emerging Greek colonies in southern Italy and Sicily, exchanging raw materials and manufactured goods for Greek pottery, wine, and luxury items. These trade relationships brought more than just material goods to Etruria. They also facilitated the exchange of ideas, artistic styles, and cultural practices that enriched Etruscan civilization and helped create its distinctive character. Greek influence is evident in Etruscan art and architecture, but it was adapted and transformed to suit local tastes and conditions rather than simply copied. The result was a unique cultural synthesis that combined Greek sophistication with Italian practicality and native Etruscan creativity. The Etruscan writing system, adapted from Greek alphabets but used to record a language completely unrelated to Greek or Latin, represents another area where foreign influence was creatively adapted to local needs. Thousands of Etruscan inscriptions have survived, mostly on tombstones and religious dedications, providing our primary source of information about their language and culture. While scholars have made considerable progress in understanding Etruscan grammar and vocabulary, many aspects of the language remain mysterious, particularly in longer texts dealing with complex religious or legal matters. The partial understanding of Etruscan language has been one of the major obstacles to fully appreciating their civilization and its achievements. Unlike contemporary Greek and Latin texts, which provide detailed information about politics, philosophy, literature, and daily life, Etruscan inscriptions are mostly brief and formulaic. We can read the names and titles of Etruscan officials, understand their religious dedications, and interpret their funeral inscriptions, but we have no access to their literature, their historical chronicles, or their philosophical and scientific works. This linguistic barrier has contributed to the relative obscurity of Etruscan civilization in popular understanding. While everyone knows about ancient Greece and Rome, the Etruscans remain mysterious figures whose achievements are often overshadowed by their more famous neighbors and successors. Yet their influence on the development of Roman civilization, and through Rome on the entire Western world, was profound and lasting. The political institutions of early Rome show clear Etruscan influences. The Roman practice of government by elected magistrates, the division of authority between different officials, and the complex religious rituals that legitimized political power all have roots in Etruscan precedents. Several of Rome's early kings were Etruscans, and the city's transformation from a small Italian town into a major power occurred largely under Etruscan leadership and influence. Roman religious practices also show extensive Etruscan influence. The art of divination through examining the entrails of sacrificed animals, the interpretation of lightning strikes and other natural omens, and the complex rituals for founding cities and dedicating temples all came from Etruscan religious traditions. Roman priests regularly consulted Etruscan religious experts, and Etruscan religious texts continued to be studied and respected long after Etruscan political independence had ended. The gradual absorption of Etruscan civilization into the expanding Roman world was a complex process that took place over several centuries. Rather than sudden conquest and destruction, it involved a gradual process of political alliance, cultural assimilation, and economic integration. Individual Etruscan cities made treaties with Rome, Etruscan nobles gained Roman citizenship, and Etruscan cultural practices were adapted and incorporated into Roman traditions. This process of assimilation was facilitated by the many similarities between Etruscan and early Roman cultures. Both were Italian peoples with similar environmental challenges and opportunities. Both had developed urban civilizations based on agriculture, trade, and skilled craftsmanship. Both valued military prowess, religious ritual, and artistic achievement. The differences between them were often matters of degree or emphasis rather than fundamental incompatibility. By the 1st century before the Common Era, independent Etruscan civilization had largely disappeared, but its influence lived on in Roman culture, law, religion, and art. The great Roman historian Livy acknowledged that much of early Roman achievement had been built on Etruscan foundations, and Roman aristocrats continued to take pride in Etruscan ancestry long after the conquest was complete. The Emperor Claudius even wrote a history of the Etruscans, though unfortunately this work has not survived to modern times. The archaeological rediscovery of Etruscan civilization began in the Renaissance, when Italian scholars and artists became fascinated by the painted tombs and beautiful artifacts found in the hills of Tuscany and Lazio. The dramatic tomb paintings, with their vivid colors and lively scenes of ancient life, captured the imagination of artists and antiquarians who saw in them a distinctive Italian artistic tradition that predated Roman conquest. Modern archaeological techniques have revealed the full extent and sophistication of Etruscan achievement. Aerial photography has identified hundreds of previously unknown sites. Ground-penetrating radar has revealed the layouts of entire cities without the need for excavation. Advanced dating techniques have clarified the chronology of Etruscan development and its relationship to contemporary civilizations throughout the Mediterranean. Perhaps most importantly, ongoing research has revealed the diversity and complexity of Etruscan civilization itself. Rather than a monolithic culture with uniform characteristics, the Etruscans encompassed multiple regional traditions, different political systems, and considerable variation in artistic styles and cultural practices. Northern Etruscan cities developed differently from those in the south. Coastal communities had different economic bases and cultural influences than inland centers. This diversity suggests a dynamic, evolving civilization that adapted continuously to changing conditions while maintaining core traditions and values. The legacy of Etruscan civilization extends far beyond their direct influence on Rome. Their innovations in metallurgy, agriculture, and urban planning contributed to the general development of Mediterranean civilization. Their artistic achievements influenced traditions throughout the ancient world. Their political and social institutions provided models for later development throughout Italy and beyond. Today, as we walk through the hilltop towns of Tuscany and Umbria, we are walking through landscapes shaped by Etruscan hands. The terraced hillsides, the drainage systems, the urban layouts, and even the names of many towns preserve the legacy of this remarkable civilization. In museums throughout Italy, Etruscan artifacts continue to amaze visitors with their beauty, sophistication, and craftsmanship. The painted tombs of Tarquinia and Cerveteri still welcome visitors into the world of the ancient Etruscans, their walls alive with scenes of banqueting, dancing, and celebration that speak across the centuries of a people who valued life, art, and human achievement. In their vibrant colors and joyful scenes, we see reflections of a civilization that combined material prosperity with spiritual depth, technical skill with artistic vision, and local tradition with cosmopolitan sophistication. The Etruscans remind us that history is written not just by the victors, but by all the peoples who contribute to human civilization. Though their political independence ended over 2,000 years ago, their achievements live on in the foundations of Western culture, the beauty of Italian landscapes, and the continuing inspiration provided by their art and architecture. They were truly Italy's forgotten ancestors, but their legacy remains visible to those who know where to look for it. High in the mountains of northern Ethiopia, where ancient plateaus rise above the Red Sea coastal plains and the air grows thin with altitude, stand the weathered obelisks of one of Africa's greatest ancient civilizations. The kingdom of Aksum, flourishing from the 1st to the 8th centuries of the Common Era, controlled trade routes that connected the Roman Empire with India and the Far East, making it one of the most powerful and prosperous states of the ancient world. Aksum emerged at a crossroads of continents and cultures, positioned perfectly to benefit from the maritime trade that connected Africa, Arabia, and the Indian Ocean world. The kingdom's ports on the Red Sea coast served as gateways for goods flowing between the Mediterranean and the markets of India, Ceylon, and even distant China. Merchants from across the known world gathered in Aksumite ports to exchange silk, spices, precious stones, ivory, and gold in a commercial network that made Aksum fabulously wealthy and internationally influential. The capital city of Aksum itself was a marvel of ancient urban planning and monumental architecture, Massive stone obelisks, some standing over 100 feet tall and carved from single blocks of granite, marked the burial places of kings and nobles. These towering monuments, decorated with intricate carvings that resembled multi-story buildings complete with windows, doors, and architectural details, demonstrated both the technical skill of Aksumite stonemasons and the wealth of the rulers who commissioned them. The largest of these obelisks, now fallen and broken into several pieces, would have stood nearly 110 feet high when complete, making it one of the tallest stone monuments ever erected in the ancient world. The precision required to quarry, transport, carve, and erect such massive structures speaks to advanced knowledge of engineering and access to enormous labor forces organized under centralized authority. Aksumite civilization developed its own distinctive writing system, one of the few indigenous African scripts to survive into the modern era. Ge'ez, the sacred language of Ethiopian Christianity, evolved from the script used in ancient Aksum and continues to be used today in Ethiopian Orthodox religious ceremonies. Thousands of inscriptions in this script, carved on stone monuments and metal objects, provide direct testimony about Aksumite rulers, their achievements, and their beliefs. The conversion of Aksum to Christianity in the 4th century under King Ezana represents one of the most significant religious transformations in ancient African history. This made Aksum one of the world's first Christian kingdoms, predating the conversion of most European territories by centuries. Ethiopian Christianity developed its own distinctive traditions, including remarkable rock-hewn churches and a rich tradition of religious art and manuscript illumination that continues to flourish today. The legendary connection between Aksum and the biblical Queen of Sheba has captured imaginations for centuries, though historians remain divided about the historical basis for this tradition. Ethiopian chronicles claim that the Queen of Sheba visited King Solomon in Jerusalem and returned to Ethiopia with their son, who became the founder of the Aksumite dynasty. While this specific claim cannot be verified archaeologically, it reflects the kingdom's genuine connections to the ancient Middle Eastern world and its important role in early Christian history. Even more intriguing is the Ethiopian Orthodox Church's claim that the Ark of the Covenant, the sacred container described in biblical accounts, was brought to Aksum by the Queen of Sheba's son and remains there to this day. The Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion in Aksum is said to house this most sacred of biblical artifacts, though access is strictly limited and no independent verification has been possible. While historians cannot confirm these claims, they reflect the deep spiritual significance that Aksum holds in Ethiopian religious tradition. The decline of Aksumite power began in the 7th century as new trade routes and political changes altered the balance of power in the Red Sea region. The rise of Islamic powers in Arabia and Egypt disrupted traditional trading patterns, while climate change brought periods of drought that challenged the agricultural systems supporting Aksumite cities. Rather than sudden collapse, archaeological evidence suggests gradual transformation as political power shifted southward into the Ethiopian highlands, where it would eventually give rise to the medieval Ethiopian Empire. The legacy of Aksum extends far beyond its political boundaries or chronological limits. As one of the great powers of the ancient world, mentioned alongside Rome, Persia, and China in contemporary texts, Aksum demonstrated Africa's central role in ancient global civilization. The kingdom's achievements in architecture, writing, trade, and religious development contributed to human cultural development and helped connect different regions of the world through networks of commerce and cultural exchange. Today, the ancient obelisks of Aksum continue to stand as silent witnesses to this remarkable civilization. Though weathered by centuries of highland storms and scorched by the intense sun of the Ethiopian plateau, they remain monuments to human achievement and reminders that Africa was home to some of the world's most sophisticated ancient civilizations. In their towering presence, they speak eloquently of a time when Ethiopian merchants sailed the Indian Ocean, when Aksumite gold financed international trade, and when the Mountain Kingdom commanded respect from powers across the ancient world. Chapter 8. Khmer Empire, Engineering Wonders of Angkor. Deep in the jungles of Cambodia, where tropical vines twist around ancient stones and the calls of exotic birds echo through temple corridors, lies one of humanity's most breathtaking architectural achievements. Angkor, the capital of the mighty Khmer Empire, was once the largest urban center in the pre-industrial world, home to over 1 million people and containing more temples and monuments than any other ancient city. The Khmer Empire flourished from the 9th to the 15th centuries of the Common Era, controlling vast territories that encompassed modern Cambodia, Vietnam, Laos, and Thailand. At its height under kings like Jayavarman VII, the empire commanded resources and manpower that allowed for construction projects of almost unimaginable scale and complexity. The result was Angkor, a city that combined practical urban planning with religious devotion to create something that still inspires awe nearly 1,000 years after its abandonment. Angkor Wat, the most famous of the city's temples, represents the pinnacle of Khmer architectural achievement. Built in the early 12th century as a Hindu temple dedicated to the god Vishnu, it covers an area larger than the Vatican City and required an estimated 300,000 workers and 6,000 elephants to complete. The precision of its construction rivals anything achieved by medieval European cathedral builders, with stones fitted so perfectly that many joints remain invisible even today. The temple's design reflects sophisticated understanding of both engineering and astronomy. Its central towers align precisely with celestial events, creating a stone calendar that tracks the movements of sun, moon, and stars across the seasons. The temple's proportions follow mathematical relationships that create visual harmony while encoding religious symbolism meaningful to Hindu cosmology. Every element, from the height of towers to the width of causeways, was calculated to create both aesthetic beauty and spiritual significance. But Angkor Wat was merely one jewel in a crown of architectural marvels. The Bayon Temple, with its 54 towers carved with serene stone faces, creates an otherworldly atmosphere where ancient kings gaze eternally across the jungle landscape. Ta Prohm, left partially unrestored, shows how quickly tropical vegetation can reclaim human constructions, with massive trees growing through temple walls in a dramatic display of nature's power over human achievement. The true marvel of Angkor, however, lay not in individual temples but in the sophisticated infrastructure that supported the entire urban complex. Recent research using advanced radar technology has revealed an elaborate system of canals, reservoirs, and hydraulic engineering that managed water resources across hundreds of square miles. This network captured monsoon rains, distributed water during dry seasons, and prevented flooding during periods of heavy rainfall. The engineering knowledge required to create this hydraulic system was extraordinary. Khmer engineers understood principles of water flow, soil management, and construction that allowed them to reshape entire landscapes. They built massive earthen dams called barrays that could hold millions of gallons of water. They carved elaborate canal networks that directed water flow with mathematical precision. They created reservoir systems that stored water for use during Cambodia's long dry season. This water management system supported not just the urban population of Angkor but also the intensive rice agriculture that fed the empire. Khmer farmers developed sophisticated techniques for growing rice in flooded fields, creating agricultural surpluses that supported the craftsmen, soldiers, and priests who built and maintained the great temple complexes. The entire civilization depended on their mastery of water, making them true hydraulic engineers centuries before the term was invented. The decline of Angkor began in the 14th century as multiple pressures combined to challenge the empire's stability. Climate records suggest that the region experienced severe droughts followed by devastating floods, disrupting the delicate balance of the water management systems. Thai kingdoms to the west grew increasingly powerful and aggressive, launching attacks that drained Khmer resources and disrupted trade networks. Internal political conflicts weakened central authority and made coordinated responses to these challenges more difficult. By the 15th century, the great city was largely abandoned as the Khmer court moved southward to areas less vulnerable to Thai attacks and less dependent on the complex hydraulic systems that had made Angkor possible. The jungle began its slow reclamation of the temples, wrapping them in green embrace until they became half-hidden ruins that inspired local legends and occasional visits from curious explorers. The rediscovery of Angkor by European explorers in the 19th century created a sensation that continues today. The French naturalist Henri Mouhot, though not actually the first European to visit the site, publicized it widely and sparked international interest in these jungle temples. His descriptions of magnificent ruins emerging from tropical vegetation captured imaginations and established Angkor as one of the world's great archaeological wonders. Today, Angkor attracts millions of visitors who come to experience the spiritual atmosphere and architectural magnificence of these ancient temples. Modern conservation efforts work to preserve the monuments while managing the challenges posed by tourism, tropical climate, and the ongoing growth of vegetation. The site represents not just Cambodia's greatest historical treasure, but a testament to human achievement that belongs to all humanity. The legacy of the Khmer Empire extends far beyond its architectural monuments. The hydraulic engineering techniques developed at Angkor influenced water management throughout Southeast Asia. The artistic traditions reflected in temple sculptures and reliefs contributed to the development of regional artistic styles. The political and administrative systems that governed this vast empire provided models for later Southeast Asian kingdoms. Perhaps most importantly, Angkor demonstrates the remarkable achievements possible when human ingenuity, natural resources, and social organization combine in favorable circumstances. The Khmer created something that was both practical and transcendent, serving the needs of urban civilization while expressing the highest aspirations of human creativity and spiritual devotion. In the silence of their ancient temples, surrounded by the sounds of the jungle that has reclaimed them, we can still sense the grandeur of a civilization that briefly achieved something approaching earthly paradise. In the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean, over 2,000 miles from the nearest populated land, rises a small triangular island that has become synonymous with both human achievement and ecological disaster. Rapanui, known to the world as Easter Island, is home to nearly 900 massive stone statues called moai that gaze silently across the ocean, their backs turned to the island they once protected. These monuments represent one of humanity's most remarkable feats of sculpture and engineering, created by Polynesian settlers who transformed this remote outpost into a complex society that flourished for centuries before facing challenges that nearly led to its complete destruction. The story of Rapa Nui begins around 1200 years of the Common Era, when Polynesian voyagers accomplished one of the greatest feats of navigation in human history. Using only traditional sailing canoes, guided by their knowledge of stars, ocean currents, and wind patterns, they crossed thousands of miles of open ocean to reach this tiny speck of land. These master navigators brought with them the plants, animals, and cultural traditions that would form the foundation of Rapa Nui civilization. The island these settlers found was a subtropical paradise quite different from the barren landscape visitors see today. Dense palm forests covered the volcanic slopes, providing wood for construction and fuel for daily life. Seabirds nested in vast colonies, offering both food and raw materials. The volcanic soil was fertile and well suited for the crops the Polynesians had brought with them. For centuries, this isolated ecosystem supported a growing population that developed increasingly sophisticated social and religious institutions. The moai statues that make Rapa Nui famous were carved over a period of several centuries, mostly between 1200 and 1500 of the Common Era. Nearly all were carved from volcanic tuff quarried at Rano Raraku, a volcanic crater that became the island's primary statue factory. The largest completed moai stands 33 feet tall and weighs over 80 tons, representing an extraordinary achievement in both artistic vision and engineering skill. The process of creating and transporting these massive sculptures required sophisticated organization and technical knowledge. Teams of skilled carvers worked for months or years to complete each statue, using only stone tools to shape the volcanic rock into precise human forms. Once completed, the statues had to be transported across the island to ceremonial platforms called ahu, where they were erected to watch over the communities they protected. Recent experimental archaeology has shed new light on how the Rapa Nui people accomplished this seemingly impossible transportation task. Rather than dragging the statues horizontally on wooden rollers, as long believed, researchers have demonstrated that the moai could be walked upright using a coordinated rocking motion controlled by ropes. This technique would have required fewer people and less wood than previously thought, suggesting that the statue construction was more sustainable than earlier theories suggested. The moai were not created as artistic expressions, but served important religious and social functions in Rapanui society. Most faced inland, watching over the communities rather than gazing out to sea. They represented deified ancestors who continued to protect and guide their descendants after death. The platforms on which they stood served as ceremonial centers where religious rituals took place and communities gathered for important social events. The traditional narrative of Rapanui's history emphasizes ecological collapse caused by overexploitation of the island's resources. According to this interpretation, the growing population cut down all the palm trees for statue transportation and other uses, leading to soil erosion, agricultural failure, and social breakdown. The construction of moai is seen as a wasteful competition between rival clans that diverted resources from practical needs and contributed to environmental destruction. However, recent archaeological research suggests a more complex and nuanced story. While ecological pressures certainly played a role in the island's transformation, the most catastrophic changes occurred after European contact in 1722. Diseases introduced by European visitors decimated the population. Slave raids by Peruvian ships in the 1860s removed over 1,000 people, including most of the island's cultural and religious leaders. By the late 19th century, the population had fallen to barely 100 individuals. This demographic catastrophe was far more devastating than any ecological changes that had occurred in the preceding centuries. The survivors faced not just environmental challenges, but the complete breakdown of traditional social institutions, the loss of cultural knowledge, and the trauma of slavery and disease. What appeared to early European visitors as evidence of ecological collapse was actually the aftermath of contact with the outside world. The resilience of Rapa Nui culture is evident in its survival despite these overwhelming challenges. The remaining population, though drastically reduced, managed to preserve essential elements of their traditions, language, and identity. Modern Rapa Nui people, while influenced by Chilean and international cultures, maintain strong connections to their Polynesian heritage and continue to care for the moai and other archaeological sites. Contemporary research has revealed the sophistication of traditional Rapa Nui agricultural techniques, which made efficient use of the island's limited resources. They developed methods for protecting crops from salt spray and wind, created stone gardens that conserved soil and moisture, and practiced sustainable fishing techniques that maintained marine resources over many generations. Rather than ecological collapse, the evidence suggests adaptive management of a challenging but sustainable environment. The moai themselves represent not wasteful competition, but successful cooperation between different parts of the island. The quarrying, carving, transportation, and erection of these massive sculptures required coordination between communities with different specializations and resources. The statue construction actually reinforced social bonds and created networks of reciprocal obligation that helped maintain peace and cooperation across the island. Today, Rapa Nui faces new challenges as increased tourism, climate change, and modern development pressures threaten both the archaeological sites and the island's fragile ecosystem. The moai suffer from weathering, pollution, and the impact of millions of visitors who come to experience these remarkable monuments. Conservation efforts work to balance preservation needs with the economic benefits that tourism brings to the island's population. The story of Rapa Nui offers important lessons about resilience, sustainability, and the complex relationships between human societies and their environments. Rather than a simple tale of ecological collapse, it reveals how indigenous peoples developed sophisticated techniques for living sustainably in challenging environments, and how outside contact can disrupt even successful adaptations. The survival of Rapa Nui culture despite overwhelming adversity demonstrates the strength of human communities and their ability to preserve essential values and traditions even in the face of catastrophic change. The moai continue to stand guard over their island home, their massive forms weathered by centuries of Pacific storms, but still maintaining their eternal vigil. In their silent presence, They remind us that human achievement comes in many forms, and that the measure of a civilization lies not just in its monuments but in its ability to create meaning, maintain community, and adapt to changing circumstances while preserving what is most essential and valuable in human experience. As we have journeyed through the ruins and monuments of these remarkable civilizations, a pattern emerges that challenges our common understanding of how societies rise and fall. The popular imagination often envisions lost civilizations as vanishing suddenly and mysteriously, leaving behind empty cities and unanswered questions. But archaeology reveals a more complex and nuanced reality, where civilizations rarely disappear completely, but instead transform, migrate, and adapt to changing circumstances in ways that preserve essential elements while abandoning others. The notion of civilizations becoming truly lost is largely a modern construct, born from our perspective as outsiders looking back across centuries or millennia of change. What appears to us as sudden disappearance was often gradual transformation that took place over many generations. The ancestral puebloans did not vanish from Mesa Verde overnight, but migrated systematically to new territories where their descendants continue to live today. The Olmec did not collapse but evolved into the cultural foundations that would support later Mesoamerican civilizations. Natural forces play a significant role in these transformations, but rarely as single catastrophic events that destroy entire societies. Climate change, whether toward greater aridity or increased rainfall, can make traditional agricultural techniques unsustainable and force populations to adapt or relocate. The Harappan civilization faced changing river courses and shifting monsoon patterns that made their carefully planned cities less viable. The Khmer Empire struggled with droughts and floods that disrupted the hydraulic systems supporting Angkor. But civilizations are remarkably adaptable, and environmental challenges often spur innovation rather than collapse. The ancestral puebloans developed increasingly sophisticated water management systems as their environment became more challenging. The Etruscans transformed marshy lowlands into productive farmland through advanced drainage techniques. When adaptation is no longer sufficient, migration becomes a survival strategy that preserves cultural knowledge and social institutions while abandoning particular locations. Human factors are equally important in the transformation of civilizations. Warfare, political instability, and social conflicts can disrupt the complex systems that support urban life and monumental construction. But even military conquest rarely results in complete cultural destruction. The Roman absorption of Etruscan civilization involved gradual political integration rather than cultural annihilation. Etruscan knowledge, traditions, and institutions became part of Roman culture, influencing the development of what would become one of history's most successful empires. Disease represents perhaps the most devastating force that civilizations have faced, particularly when it involves contact between previously isolated populations. The impact of European diseases on Rapanui demonstrates how quickly demographic catastrophe can transform thriving societies into struggling survivors. Yet even in these extreme cases, cultural continuity often persists through the dedication of survivors who preserve essential knowledge and traditions for future generations. Economic factors also contribute to the transformation of civilizations, though these are often interconnected with environmental and political changes. The decline of trade routes can undermine the economic foundations of commercial centers like those of the Harappan civilization. Shifts in resource availability or demand can make certain locations less viable while creating opportunities elsewhere. The Olmec adaptation to changing conditions in their tropical homeland involved economic as well as cultural innovations. The role of external contact in civilizational transformation is particularly complex. While contact can bring devastating diseases or military conquest, it can also introduce new technologies, ideas, and opportunities that enhance rather than destroy existing cultures. The Aksumite kingdom flourished through its connections to international trade networks, while the Etruscans benefited from cultural exchange with Greek colonies and other Mediterranean peoples. What we perceive as civilizational loss often reflects our limited perspective rather than historical reality. The undeciphered scripts of the Harappans make their achievements seem more mysterious than those of contemporary civilizations whose languages we can read. The gradual nature of most civilizational transformations means that dramatic changes are often invisible to individual generations, becoming apparent only when viewed across centuries of archaeological evidence. Modern archaeology increasingly reveals that apparent civilizational endpoints are actually transition points where societies reorganize themselves around new centers, new technologies, or new environmental realities. The abandonment of cliff dwellings in Mesa Verde coincided with the establishment of new communities in the Rio Grande Valley. The decline of classical Mayan cities was followed by continued cultural development in other regions and time periods. The concept of lost civilizations also reflects our modern tendency to associate cultural achievement with monumental architecture and urban centers. When these visible markers are abandoned, we assume the civilization has ended, even though the people, their knowledge, and their traditions may continue in less archaeologically visible forms. Nomadic or dispersed populations leave fewer traces for archaeologists to find, making their continued existence less apparent to modern observers. Understanding why civilizations transform rather than disappear completely offers important insights for contemporary challenges. Modern societies face environmental changes, resource limitations, and social pressures similar to those that challenged ancient civilizations. The archaeological record suggests that successful adaptation often involves flexibility, innovation, and willingness to modify traditional practices while preserving essential cultural values. The resilience demonstrated by ancient civilizations also highlights the importance of cultural knowledge, social cooperation, and adaptive capacity in facing unprecedented challenges. The Göbekli Tepe builders organized complex construction projects without centralized governments. The Rapanui people developed sustainable practices for island living. The Khmer Empire created sophisticated infrastructure for water management. These achievements required not just technical knowledge, but social institutions capable of coordinating complex activities over long periods. Perhaps most importantly, the study of lost civilizations reveals the remarkable creativity and adaptability of human societies throughout history. Each civilization we have explored developed unique solutions to universal challenges of organization, resource management, and cultural expression. Their diversity demonstrates that there are many pathways to social complexity and cultural achievement, not a single trajectory that all societies must follow. The civilizations explored in our journey remind us that human achievement takes many forms and can persist through transformations that might appear catastrophic from the outside. Their monuments may crumble and their cities may be abandoned, but the knowledge, traditions, and innovations they created continue to influence human development in ways both obvious and subtle. In studying their stories, we gain not only knowledge of the past, but insights that can guide our own responses to the challenges and opportunities of an uncertain future. As our journey through the world's lost civilizations draws to a close, we find ourselves not at endings, but at beginnings. Each site we have explored, each mystery we have pondered, each achievement we have celebrated speaks to the enduring power of human creativity and the remarkable resilience of our species in the face of profound challenges. The archaeologists who carefully excavate these ancient sites, brushing sand from pottery shards and mapping the foundations of forgotten buildings, are not merely uncovering the past, but illuminating pathways to understanding ourselves. In the sophisticated water management systems of the Khmer Empire, we see early solutions to problems we still face today. In the sustainable island living techniques of Rapanui, we find models for resource management in our interconnected world. In the organizational achievements of Göbekli Tepe's builders, we discover that cooperation and shared vision can accomplish seemingly impossible goals. These civilizations may have faded from their original landscapes, but they live on in ways both subtle and profound. Every time we use urban planning principles, we echo the Harappan engineers who designed the world's first grid cities. Every time we appreciate the integration of art and architecture, we participate in traditions pioneered by Olmec sculptors and Etruscan craftsmen. Every time we navigate by the stars or mark the passage of seasons, we draw upon knowledge systems refined by ancestral puebloan astronomers and other ancient observers of the natural world. The monuments they left behind continue to inspire wonder and contemplation. The massive heads of the Olmec still gaze across tropical landscapes with expressions of serene authority. The towering obelisks of Aksum still pierce the Ethiopian sky like stone prayers reaching toward heaven. The Moai of Rapanui still maintain their eternal vigil over the Pacific, their backs turned protectively toward the communities they were carved to guard. But perhaps the greatest legacy of these lost civilizations lies not in their monuments, but in their demonstration that human societies can take many different forms while achieving remarkable sophistication and beauty. They remind us that there is no single path to civilization, no inevitable progression that all societies must follow. Each found its own way to create meaning, organize complex activities, and leave lasting contributions to human development. In their diversity, we find hope. In their achievements, we find inspiration. In their resilience through transformation and change, we find models for our own adaptation to an uncertain future. The stories of lost civilizations are ultimately stories of human possibility, reminders that our ancestors accomplished extraordinary things with far fewer resources than we possess today, and that their greatest achievements were often born from cooperation, creativity, and deep understanding of the natural world around them. As we return from our journey through ancient times and distant places, we carry with us the echoes of these remarkable civilizations. Their voices speak to us across the centuries through carved stone and carefully fitted masonry, through astronomical alignments and engineering marvels, through art that still moves us and innovations that still serve us. They remind us that we are part of a long human story of achievement and adaptation, creativity and resilience, dreams made manifest in stone and earth, and the enduring power of human imagination. The past is not truly past as long as we remember it, learn from it, and carry its lessons forward into our own time. In the whisper of wind through ancient ruins and the play of sunlight on weathered stones, the voices of our ancestors continue to guide us, reminding us of what we are capable of achieving when we combine vision with determination, knowledge with wisdom, and individual talent with collective purpose.